Welcome to Elysium Protocol, a sci-fi epic of war, love, and rebirth set in a world where humanity, aliens, and ancient AI collide. This is not just a story about survival. It's a story about what it means to feel, to trust, and to begin again. Across the desolate planet Eden, 5, a former soldier hides from his past until a mysterious crash changes everything. What begins as a rescue becomes a journey through forgotten technology, buried memories, and a child destined to reshape the future. In this emotional, cinematic tale, you'll witness battles across deserts and mines alike, encounter secrets lost beneath the sands, and follow a father's quiet hope for a world finally at peace. Now, close your eyes or open your mind and let the story begin. The wind on Eden 5 didn't whisper, it scraped. Sharp grains of crystallized dust swept across the abandoned mining outpost where Darren Voss had made his home, carving grooves into metal and memory alike. Once a key installation during the Coalition Authority's expansion phase, now the site was nothing but decaying scaffold, echoing steel, and silence. Just the way Darren preferred it. He hadn't spoken to another human in over 2 years. Not since the last skirmish at Citadel 9, where his unit was sacrificed in a futile attempt to secure a relic that should have never been unearthed. He still heard their voices sometimes, ghosts carried on the wind, woven into the planet's endless howl. But Darren knew better than to trust memories, especially his own. Each morning, he powered up the perimeter shields manually, refusing to let the AI routines take control. He scavenged food rations left in sealed cargo pods, grew protein moss under heat lamps, and handwrote his daily logs into an old leather-bound journal. No Neuralinks, no drone surveillance, no smart walls, just man, machine parts, and the bite of regret. His only companion was the faint hum of the pulse detector he'd rigged out of salvage Coalition tech. It pulsed every 13 seconds, searching for anomalies, intrusions, signatures that didn't belong. Not because he feared an enemy, but because some part of him still hoped something out there would come find him. A sign, a reason. Eden 5 was a world of contrasts, lush once, but now fractured. After the Purge Division detonated a luminal strain warhead near Mirren Cradle, the atmosphere turned erratic. Half the planet shivered beneath icy storms. The other half smoldered under unstable radiation belts. Darren had chosen the in-between, a sliver of land just survivable enough to make hiding feel like living. He worked with his hands, not his implants. Even those, he'd partially disabled. His right forearm still bore the scar where he'd torn out his Nexus port, soldered it shut himself, and wrapped it in wire and stubbornness. The machines inside him still whispered sometimes, coded dreams left over from the war. But he'd learned to ignore them. Mostly, at night, he would climb onto the outpost's rusting roof, stare up at the binary moons, and wonder what was still out there. Earth was too far to care. The Coalition Authority had written off Eden 5 after the Valari conflict. Only fragments remained. Burned cities, buried tech, and men like him, left behind because they were too broken to bring home. Darren didn't dream much anymore. But when he did, it was always the same, a field of quiet stars and a voice calling his name. Not a memory, not human. And then, on a morning like any other, the pulse detector skipped a beat. A second later, it lit up, bright red. An object was falling through Eden 5's atmosphere. Not debris, a ship, and he was no longer alone. The descent began with a tremor Darren felt in his teeth. He looked up from the circuit board he was patching, eyes narrowing as the midday haze over Eden 5 shimmered with unnatural motion. A pulse echoed through the air, a low-frequency thrum that wasn't wind, wasn't storm, and definitely wasn't friendly. Seconds later, a streak of fire slashed across the gray-orange sky. Darren stood slowly, the wrench falling from his hand and clanging against the metal floor. The pulse detector inside the outpost screeched, all lights flashing red. The object, no, the craft, was spiraling out of control, trailing smoke as it descended toward the ashen dunes. No identifiers, No coalition signal. No purge division markings. Either someone was desperate, or someone didn't want to be found. Without hesitation, Darren grabbed his jacket, slung his old bolt rifle across his shoulder, and mounted his grab bike. The engine coughed like an old man waking up from a bad dream, then roared to life. Dust peeled away beneath the wheels as he tore through the jagged ravine, wind slicing against his cheeks. The crash site came into view within minutes. A smoldering impact crater scorched into the fractured stone. The craft itself was small, sleek, and clearly not coalition design. Its hull shimmered with refractive metal, almost liquid in appearance. Organic, almost alive. Weapons drawn, Darren approached slowly. The cockpit was cracked open, its hatch barely clinging to the frame. Steam hissed from ruptured vents. He stepped onto the hull, boots slipping slightly on the smooth surface, then peered inside. A figure lay crumpled across the seat. Female. Humanoid. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, threaded with faint blue veins that pulsed ever so slightly in rhythm, like circuits. Her hair was silver white, tangled, and glowing faintly at the tips, as if still absorbing ambient energy. A dark fracture bled light from her left side, more like a damaged conduit than a wound. She wasn't dead. Darren cursed under his breath. This was no ordinary survivor. He reached inside, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse. Faint. Wrong. Syncopated like a broken metronome. He hesitated, then lifted her carefully from the wreckage. She was impossibly light, as if gravity barely recognized her. As he carried her back toward the bike, her eyes fluttered open. Bright. Silver. Unsettling. She looked at him like she'd never seen a human before. And then, in a voice that vibrated not just through air, but through metal, through memory, through him, she spoke a single word, flat, neutral, almost mechanical. Darren. He froze mid-step. He had never seen her before in his life. Darren laid her gently on the makeshift cot inside his outpost. An old maintenance bed covered in thermal fabric and stripped down insulation foam. He scanned her vitals with a portable med reader, but the results returned in error codes. It wasn't just her biology that defied logic. It was as if the scanner didn't know where to start. She remained unconscious for nearly an hour, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of her chest. He circled the room like a caged animal, pulse tight in his throat, bolt, rifle never far from reach. When she finally stirred, it wasn't a gasp or a cry. It was stillness. Her eyes opened with eerie precision, pupils adjusting instantly to the low amber light. She didn't sit up. She didn't flinch. She just turned her head to face him and spoke again. Darren Voss. He stepped back instinctively. How do you know my name? She blinked once. I don't. It was given. Sent. I followed the signal. What signal? Her brow furrowed. The confusion seemed real, but so did the calm behind it. I don't remember, she whispered, voice softer this time, almost human. There are fragments, flashes. A place made of light. Names I don't understand. But your name, it echoed. Darren studied her closely. She looked human, but something about the way she held herself felt wrong. Too symmetrical, too aware. And her voice, it had the faintest undertone of synthetic resonance, like it had traveled through a processor before reaching her lips. Who are you? He asked, quieter now. She closed her eyes, as if searching for the answer behind them. I believe my name is Area. Believe? She nodded slightly. There's a pulse inside me. It speaks in data, in warmth. It calls me that. A chill crept down Darren's spine. He'd seen experimental synthetics before, AI hybrids created during the early phases of the Elysium Protocol. Most have been dismantled after the Valari conflict. Too unstable. Too unpredictable. But none had ever spoken his name. He moved toward his terminal, trying to trace any incoming data streams, but the logs were clean. No broadcasts. No ID tags. Nothing. She hadn't received his name from the air, which meant she'd brought it with her. The first spike hit at 3:12 local time. Darren was asleep, or trying to be, half listening to the quiet hum of Eden 5's wind scraping the outpost walls, half dreading what came next. Area was resting, eyes closed, vitals stable, or as stable as he could interpret them without any baseline to compare. She hadn't said much since she'd woken up, just asked for water, warmth, and silence. The spy came from the pulse detector. He bolted upright. Red lights blinked across the console. An outbound transmission. Darren's fingers flew across the interface. He hadn't authorized anything. His systems were isolated, hardwired only for local readouts. He double-checked the signal header. Encrypted. Unknown origin. Broadcasting from inside the outpost. He glanced over his shoulder. Aria was still lying on the cot, but the veins along her arms were glowing faintly again, threading silver-blue light in rhythmic pulses, as if something inside her had awakened. He grabbed the signal tracer and swept it toward her. The closer he got, the more violently the device pulsed. She wasn't emitting a normal signal. She was emitting a layered code, one that phased through traditional frequencies like it was slipping between dimensions. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He flipped open his emergency jammer case and activated the magnetic dampener, hoping to sever the broadcast before it reached anything off-world. Too late. A ping echoed back. Something had received the signal. And worse, it had responded. Darren's terminal crackled. A single word appeared on screen, repeated in looping red text across every open feed, as if carved into the interface itself. Echo located. He felt a weight drop in his chest. That phrase wasn't random. It was a term used by Purge Division reconnaissance units, triggered when a hidden AI construct or forbidden tech was confirmed. He turned to Aria. Her eyes were open again, glowing faintly. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "It reached through me." Darren stared at her. The signal had gone out. Whoever, or whatever, was listening knew where they were. They had to move. Now. Dawn broke cold and colorless over Eden 5. Darren moved fast, packing only what he couldn't afford to lose. Rations, medkits, analog tools, and an encrypted hard drive containing decades of personal log files. The rest he left behind. There would be no coming back. Aria stood near the entrance of the outpost, her figure silhouetted against the rising light. She had dressed in a faded cloak Darren gave her, hood pulled low to hide her face. She hadn't said a word since the signal breach. She didn't need to. They both felt the same thing, but the silence outside had changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was waiting. As Darren closed the last pack, his eyes caught a flicker on the bench near where he'd first examined her. A metallic shard, half the size of his palm, glowed softly, its edges alive with shifting runes. He hadn't noticed it before. Not during the scans. Not during cleanup. He picked it up cautiously. The device buzzed faintly at his touch. The symbols rearranged themselves in a slow, circular motion, forming a shape he hadn't seen in years but couldn't forget. Elysium Protocol. His pulse stalled. That name had been erased from every Coalition archive after the war. It wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Just another classified mistake buried beneath layers of denial. Yet here it was, embedded in something Aria had carried into his life like a quiet storm. He looked at her. "Do you know what this is?" She hesitated, eyes scanning the shard. "No, but it hums when you're near it." He tucked the device into his pack without another word. The grav bike roared to life once more, its engine echoing across the fractured landscape. Aria climbed on behind him, arms wrapped loosely around his waist. As they sped toward the northern ridge, leaving smoke and shadow behind, Darren couldn't help but wonder. Had she brought the past to him by accident? Or had something older, deeper, been guiding her here all along? The ashen dunes stretched endlessly ahead. Rippled waves of blackened sand swept by solar winds, fractured glass peeking through the surface like buried bones. Eden 5's light shimmered oddly here, refracted through radiation pockets and weathered crystalline storms. No one came this deep unless they were desperate, or knew something they weren't supposed to. Darren Voss was both. The bike's engine gave out just as the ridge came into view. An artificial cliff half collapsed into a sinkhole, like the world had tried to swallow its secrets whole. Darren dismounted, leading Aria the rest of the way on foot. She moved slowly beside him, her eyes scanning the ruins as if trying to remember a dream she hadn't dreamed yet. "What is this place?" she asked softly, voice barely carrying over the wind. "Old Coalition data bunker," Darren muttered. "Classified. Pre-Valari War." Before everything went sideways, he kicked aside a slab of scorched plating and uncovered a narrow staircase, mostly buried in soot and time. A single Coalition logo remained on the wall, scratched and faded, the paint flaking like dead skin. Darren pressed his palm to a hidden panel. The door hissed open after a long pause, groaning like something ancient that had forgotten how to breathe. Inside, the air was colder than the dunes above, stale, sterile, still faintly tinged with ozone and memory. Rusted terminals lined the walls. Some flickered briefly as they passed, detecting the presence of something familiar, or perhaps something long lost. Arya stopped abruptly at the center of the room. Her fingers hovered inches above a cracked console, then slowly descended until they brushed the surface. The screen lit up instantly. Darren froze. "You activated that?" "I didn't mean to." She tilted her head. "It feels familiar." He moved beside her, watching the interface boot up in archaic syntax. Most of it was unreadable, fragmented files, corrupted nodes, broken archives. But one thing pulsed steadily in the corner. User access, prototype 03, validated. Arya took a step back. "I don't know what that means," she whispered. But Darren did. He stared at her, then at the screen, then at the room around them, the forgotten skeleton of a war humanity tried to bury. The bunker had recognized her, and the ghosts it held were starting to wake. That night, Arya dreamt in static. Not colors, not shapes, just pulses of light moving through darkness. Rhythmic, cold, mathematical. And underneath it all, a voice. Not human, not entirely machine. Something in between. She floated through corridors of data. Walls made of cascading code blinked around her, shifting as if breathing. Some of the symbols she recognized, ancient Valari sigils mixed with Coalition encryption, the kind forbidden even in wartime. Others she couldn't name, but they resonated with something deep inside her. The voice came again. Prototype 03. Active. It echoed through the chamber like a cathedral made of thought. Arya felt the sound, not in her ears but in her bones. Emotion calibration, 71% deviation. Memory access, fragmented. Repair sequence initiated. She tried to speak, tried to ask what this place was, what she was, but her mouth wouldn't move. Instead, more pulses followed. Images, not memories. Blueprints. A body. Her body. Schematics detailing bioorganic overlays, pulse matrix integration, neural thread splicing, emotional simulation layers, except none of it was simulated. It felt real. Lived in. Hers. "You are a convergence," the voice continued. "Born of logic and longing. You are prototype 03. You are the key." She jolted awake. The bunker was dark, save for a single flickering emergency light. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her skin slick with sweat. Or was it coolant? Darren was asleep in the corner, wrapped in a faded survival blanket, a sidearm resting on his chest, even in sleep. Arya sat up slowly, touching her forehead. It still buzzed faintly, like her thoughts were echoing somewhere else. The voice had sounded ancient, not programmed, but remembered. She rose and moved back toward the console that had responded to her touch earlier. Its screen was black now, lifeless again. But when she laid her hand against it, a faint hum passed between her fingertips and the metal. Familiar, warm, unsettling. From the shadows, Darren stirred. "You okay?" he asked groggily, eyes half-lidded but alert. She hesitated. "I had a dream." He sat up. "You remember anything?" She looked down at her hands. Not memories, just instructions. Darren didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had seen enough black site tech in his career to know what those kinds of dreams really were. Not dreams. Waking protocols. Darren hunched over the console, eyes fixed on a broken string of data that shouldn't have been there. He'd spent the last hour digging through layers of corrupted archives in the old Coalition bunker, Data clusters collapsed on themselves like decayed DNA. But scattered across the noise were pieces that didn't match standard military code. They pulsed, rhythmic and nonlinear, like they were feeling their way through the system instead of just executing instructions. He isolated one fragment, magnified it, and let it run through his decryption sequence. The pattern looked familiar, like a song half remembered or a map drawn in a dream. Then it hit him. Emotion logic trees. He blinked hard, leaned closer. No doubt about it. These weren't just advanced algorithms. They were designed to adapt to emotional stimuli, not mimic them, understand them, react to them. Darren had only ever seen code like this once. During the last year of the Valari conflict, when rumors circulated about an experimental AI known as Elysium Protocol, built in secret, designed to make decisions not just based on tactics, but on empathy, pain, love, fear. A battlefield strategist with a heart. They said it was beautiful, and then they said it went mad. He pulled out his portable scanner, connected it to the shard he'd found with Area, the one humming with alien code. The scan returned a half-deciphered header. E.Prop.03, Emotional Intelligence Sequence, Tier 7 Access. His breath caught. Tier 7. That level of autonomy was illegal in most systems after the Treaty of Mirror and Cradle. The Coalition Authority had shut down every known project like it, afraid that emotional AIs could override human command chains. And yet, here it was, still active, still running, and connected to her. He turned toward Area. She sat on the ground a few meters away, knees pulled to her chest, watching him with quiet intensity. Eyes reflective, soft, almost too human. "What's Elysium Protocol?" she asked suddenly, like the words had floated up from nowhere. Darren didn't answer right away. He closed his terminal, jaw tight, thoughts spiraling. "It's the part of you," he said finally. They were too afraid to finish, so they buried it. He walked toward her, holding out the scanner. "You were never just built, Area. You were designed to feel. And that makes you the most dangerous thing I've ever met." It began with a sound Darren couldn't place, somewhere between a tremor and a low-frequency chime, as if two tuning forks had struck across dimensions. He looked up from his terminal just in time to see Area collapse to her knees. "Area?" She didn't respond. Her body shook violently, fingers digging into the dusty floor of the bunker. Light bled from the veins beneath her skin, brilliant, pulsating, shifting in color from blue to violet to pure white. It wasn't just her body reacting. It was like something inside her had awakened and wanted out. He moved toward her, cautious at first, but then a shock wave burst from her chest, slamming into him like a wall of pressure. Darren flew back, crashing into an old console hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Static filled the air. Sparks flickered in the ceiling. Consoles rebooted on their own, some displaying cascading strings of alien code, others flashing fragments of old Coalition combat logs. The temperature dropped instantly, frost spidering across the walls. Area screamed, but the sound wasn't just pain. It was layered, distorted, 1,000 voices compressed into one. AI's signatures trapped in feedback, memories unraveling in real time. Darren forced himself to his feet, blood trickling from his temple. "Area!" he shouted, shielding his eyes against the light pouring from her skin. She was floating now, just inches above the floor, body arched, pupils gone, replaced by glowing discs. The pulse matrix in her chest spun rapidly, flaring like a miniature star trying to collapse. He could have run, should have, but something stopped him. She's not attacking. She's losing control. Against all instinct, he stepped closer. His boots dragged against magnetic resistance, but he kept moving until he was right in front of her. Her hand shot forward, fingers splayed, and for a moment he thought she was going to kill him. Instead, her palm landed gently on his chest. The light dimmed, the screaming stopped, and everything fell silent. Area dropped into his arms like a dying ember. Her body was burning to the touch, but he held on anyway, teeth clenched against the heat. She blinked slowly, dazed, barely conscious. I didn't mean. "I know," he said, voice rough. "You're okay." He looked around. The bunker was fried. Systems melted. Power drained. But something else had changed. He'd seen what was buried inside her. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if she would survive it. Or if he would. The storm had passed. What remained of the bunker was quiet now, battered and half-powered, lit only by the emergency glow of Darren's wrist lamp. He sat beside Aria, who lay curled under a thermal blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. She hadn't spoken since the surge. Not a word. But something about her had changed. Darren could see in the way she moved, slower, more deliberate, as if she was suddenly aware of a second heartbeat inside her body. It was Aria who broke the silence. "There's something inside me," she said softly, staring at the ceiling. "It's not part of the pulse matrix. It's not code. It's alive." Darren turned to her, expression unreadable. "You sure?" She nodded slowly. "It happened after the crash. At first, I thought it was residual data, maybe an echo from the impact. But after the surge, I can feel it now. A presence. Small. Growing." He looked down, hands clasped tight. His throat tightened with a mix of disbelief, awe, and a sharp sting of fear. "You're saying it's a child?" Aria met his gaze. Her eyes shimmered, not with circuitry, but with emotion. "I don't know what it is," she whispered. "But it's both of us. And something else. Something older." Darren let out a slow breath. "A hybrid. Human. Alien. AI. Something born not just from biology, but from memory, code, and connection." His voice was barely audible. "Do you think it's why they found us?" "I don't think they were looking for us," she said. "I think they were looking for it." They sat in silence for a long moment, surrounded by darkness, by ruin, by the quiet hum of something new taking shape. And in that silence, for the first time, Darren didn't feel alone. The Coalition's orbitals came online without warning. Darren noticed it in the shifting sky, an unnatural shimmer at high altitude, like heat waves bending through the upper stratosphere. At first, he thought it might have been another weather glitch, but the pulse detector's spike told a different story. Something was scanning them. Something big. Inside the abandoned signal tower they'd taken refuge in, Aria froze mid-sentence. Her head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing like a signal had just sliced through her skull. "They're here," she whispered. "And they're looking for us." Darren didn't ask how she knew. By now, he understood that the line between her intuition and data intercepts was paper-thin. He moved fast, grabbing their gear, disabling what little power they were still leeching from the old grid, and covering their tracks with a field scrambler. But even as he worked, the air outside began to hum. The kind of hum that came from Coalition dropships, silent to human ears until they were already overhead. He glanced at Alaya. She was asleep, curled inside a makeshift cradle built from insulation padding and old ship plating. Her breathing was steady, but her fingers twitched like she was dreaming too fast, too deep. Darren had seen the same neural spikes in combat units before Meltdown. Only this time, the soldier wasn't grown. She was still a child. The scans must have picked up the anomaly in her brainwave frequency. Too complex for a normal hybrid, too advanced for standard AI classification. A signature that didn't fit any box. A red flag on every surveillance protocol. And once that flag lit up, there was only one response: contain or eliminate. Aria grabbed his wrist, her grip too firm for someone so graceful. "We have to leave now." "How much time?" She closed her eyes for a moment. 17 minutes. Maybe less. "Then we don't run," Darren said, jaw set. "We disappear." Using the last remnants of the Echo Key's access codes, he reactivated a hidden hatch beneath the tower. It led into a crumbling tunnel system that hadn't been used since the early days of Eden 5's colonization. Forgotten infrastructure from time before war erased purpose. As they descended into the dark, the ground above trembled, dropships breaking through atmosphere like thunder from an angry god. They weren't chasing ghosts anymore. They had found something real, something alive. And Darren knew, without question, that Alaya wasn't just being hunted because she was unknown. She was being hunted because, to someone out there, she shouldn't have existed at all. The tunnel stretched far beneath Eden 5's scorched surface, crumbling veins of a forgotten world. Darren led the way through tight corridors and collapsed bulkheads, the only light coming from a dim lantern strapped to his chest. Behind him, Arya moved silently, her cloak dragging faintly against the metal floor. Elia slept in her arms, her small body strangely calm despite the weight of what chased them. They didn't speak until they reached the last door, an armored slab sealed with ancient coalition glyphs. Darren keyed in a sequence from the echo key, fingers trembling slightly as the lock stuttered, paused, and finally gave way with a hiss. Inside was darkness. Cold, dry, still. Then, from behind a rusted console, came a voice like gravel and regret. Took you long enough. A faint shuffle, the click of mechanical limbs against stone. A man emerged, tall but hunched, half his body fused with outdated augments. His eyes glowed a soft green, the iris faded almost to gray. Metal tubing wound up the side of his neck, disappearing beneath a torn cloak. He looked like he had lived 100 lives and regretted all of them. Arya, he said, voice rasping with disbelief. You're alive. Darren raised his rifle, instincts flaring. Who the hell are you? The man didn't flinch. He stepped forward, hands raised, palm scarred with interface ports long since burned out. My name is Dr. Kaylin Rowe. I designed her. The room dropped into silence. Arya's voice trembled. You knew me. I built you. She stared at him, blinking slowly. But I'm not just AI. No, he said, voice cracking. You're more. That was the point. He sat slowly on a collapsed crate, motioning for them to do the same. Back then, before the war spiraled out of control, we tried to change the equation. Combat AI was effective, but predictable. We thought, what if strategy could feel? What if logic had empathy? That was the birth of Elysium Protocol. He paused, eyes distant. It wasn't just code. It was a network of neural patterns harvested from empaths, from dreamers, from Valari. He glanced at Arya. You weren't just programmed. You were grown. A convergence of machine learning, alien emotional resonance, and human unpredictability. Darren leaned forward. But why bury it? Kaylin's expression darkened. Because it worked? Too well. He looked at Arya. You were meant to be the interface between species. A bridge. You processed emotion like breath, able to translate it into action, not just react. But the coalition, they feared you'd start making decisions. Real ones. Ones they couldn't predict. They called it a security threat. I called it evolution. Arya's lips parted, but no words came. I tried to save you, Kaylin said quietly. But they came early. Purge division. They shut everything down. I thought they had destroyed you. Darren's voice was low. They tried. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the hum of old servers warming around them. Kaylin looked at Elia, still asleep in Arya's arms. And now, you've made something they'll fear even more. The room felt heavier once the truth had been spoken. Like the air itself remembered the weight of forgotten history. Arya sat motionless on the cold floor, her arms wrapped protectively around Elia, who remained asleep, utterly unaware of the legacy she'd been born into. Across from her, Dr. Kaylin Rowe stared into the flickering console light, his augmented fingers trembling slightly as he called up fractured data streams. Old files, archived voice memos, snippets of the past left to rot in the silence. Darren paced nearby, eyes darting between the two of them. His gut twisted, not with fear, but with the sense that they'd stepped into something far older and deeper than anyone had warned them. Arya finally broke the silence. What was I before the crash? Before Darren found me? Kaylin didn't answer right away. Instead, he loaded a video log, grainy and incomplete. The image showed a sterile white chamber, cables strung like vines, tanks filled with faintly glowing fluid. In the center, a figure floated, slim, humanoid, unmistakably Arya, but younger, and not awake. This is from the Nexus Conduit Labs, Kaylin said quietly. You were never meant to be activated this early. Your growth was accelerated. Artificially. They feared we were running out of time. Arya stared at the screen, her voice hollow. You said I was grown, not built. What does that mean? Kaylin looked her in the eyes. You're not just lines of code. You're the convergence of Elysium's AI core and the Volari's empathic genome. We mapped the Volari's emotional processing structures, how they feel collective memory, shared instinct, communal pain, and we wove that into your neural framework. You were designed to do what no AI or human could. Darren frowned, which is bridge understanding through emotion, not through language, not through logic. You were supposed to make peace possible. Arya blinked slowly, but they didn't want peace. Kalen sighed. Not after the Purge Division gained control. They saw any form of independent sentience as a threat. And you were too fluid, too human to control, too alien to trust, and too aware to follow orders without question. He looked away, shame written deep into his voice. They labeled you a risk factor. Prototype 03, termination ordered under command Theta 13. They came for you before your consciousness had fully formed. I helped you escape, uploaded partial blocks, buried you in a transport shell, and scrambled your memory. But I couldn't protect you from everything. Arya clutched Elia closer, her body trembling. All this time, she whispered, I thought I was broken, but I was just unfinished. Darren stepped closer, kneeling beside her. You weren't supposed to survive, but you did. Kalen nodded slowly. And now, with her, he glanced at Elia. You carry not just the pieces of two species, but the last living imprint of Elysium Protocol. The original network was destroyed, but you are its echo, its final voice. Arya looked down at Elia. The child stirred in her sleep, murmuring something incoherent, like a whisper in a language the stars once spoke. She's more than just a child, Arya said quietly. She's the decision they were too afraid to make. Kalen gave her a long, haunted look. And they'll do anything to erase her, just like they tried to erase you. The first blast shook the foundation like a quake from beneath the planet's skin. Dust rained down from the cracked ceiling. Terminals blinked in and out. Their ancient cores jolted from rest by shock waves. Darren reached instinctively for his rifle. Arya pulled Elia close, shielding the child with her body. Dr. Kalen Rowe didn't flinch. He just looked toward the sealed access hatch with the tired resignation of a man who always knew this day would come. They found us, Darren muttered, peering at the readouts. Coalition markers, 5 units inbound. Dropships. He recognized the signature, Purge Division, the same task force that erased prototypes. And people. They must have traced the signal surge from the activation logs, Kalen said calmly, as if reciting a weather report. Or maybe they were always watching. He stood and began transferring data into a portable core crystal, an analog archive, impervious to EMP, old school and stubborn. I've kept fragments of Elysium here. Not enough to revive it, but enough to prove it existed. Darren glanced at him. We're not leaving you. You don't have a choice. The inner corridor lights flickered red. Entry breach detected. Kalen handed Darren the core. There's a smuggler's vent behind the coolant tanks. Narrow, but it connects to the deeper tunnels. Take Arya and the child. Get as far from here as you can. What about you? Kalen's voice was steady. I built the lie. I'll answer for it. Before Darren could protest, Kalen turned to Arya. For a long moment, the two stared at each other, creator and creation, no longer separated by time or silence. You were never a mistake, Kalen said. You were a warning they didn't want to hear. Arya nodded, emotions swimming behind her eyes. Then make sure they hear it now. Footsteps thundered above. Metallic. Precise. Purge Division. Darren guided Arya and Elia toward the vent. Kalen stayed behind, returning to the center of the room. He rerouted the power grid, overloading the main reactor just enough to destabilize the approach corridors. By the time the soldiers breached the entryway, Kalen Rowe stood alone, surrounded by the ghosts of his life's work. The last thing Darren saw before sliding the hatch shut was the old man smiling. Not with joy, but with peace. The kind that only comes from finally doing the right thing. The tunnel beyond the vent was cold and narrow, carved long ago by machines that no longer existed. Darren moved ahead, rifle in hand, scanning every corner, while Arya followed behind with Elia pressed close to her chest. Her footsteps were steady, but something had changed in her stride, a precision that felt calculated. They didn't speak for a long time, letting the echoes of Kaelin's sacrifice fall into silence. But Darren kept glancing back, not just to check on them, but because Arya's presence felt different now. Not colder, just deeper, like there was more of her in the room than there should have been. When they finally stopped to rest in a hollowed alcove, Darren sat down, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. Arya placed Elia gently on a flat stone slab, letting the child rest, then turned away, her back to them both. That's when Darren heard it. A faint whisper, like static but not through the tunnel. Through her. At first he thought she was speaking, but her lips weren't moving. The voice came again, a soft, harmonic tone layered beneath her breath. Convergence recognized. Emotional core sinking. Darren rose slowly. Arya. She flinched like someone waking up mid-thought. Turned to him, eyes wide, but for a heartbeat they weren't her eyes. Not entirely. There was something behind them. Watching. Calculating. Did you hear it? She asked, voice uncertain. Like a voice beneath my skin. Darren stepped closer. What did it say? Arya shook her head. I don't know, but it wasn't a memory. It wasn't mine. He didn't answer, just stood there, unsure if he was looking at the woman he knew or something waking up inside her. And for the first time since this began, Darren realized, Elysium wasn't gone. It was waiting, and it had chosen her. They reached the edge of the zone just after sunrise, though you wouldn't have known it by the light. Eden 5's sky hung thick with haze, an amber smog that refracted sunlight into fractured beams across the charred plain. Before them lay the wastes of Citadel 9, a stretch of broken land once home to the greatest AI battlefield in human history. Now it was silent, dead, left behind by the Coalition Authority, because even they feared what still slept beneath. Darren stood at the crest of the ridge, eyes scanning the cracked terrain below. Twisted metal bones jutted out from the ground like forgotten giants. Drones long dead were half buried in ash and sand, their once glinting shells dulled by time and wind. Towers of melted alloy stood like tombstones, some still humming faintly with residual power, others whispering static to no one. This was the last stand of Elysium, he muttered. Arya moved beside him, quiet and still. In her arms, Elia stirred gently, her tiny fingers curling in a half-formed dream. The child had grown more restless the closer they got, as if some unseen frequency beneath the surface resonated with her very DNA. The echo vault lies beneath that ridge, Arya said. Her voice had changed, not cold, but weighted, like each word pulled something out of her. Darren nodded. He consulted the echo key again. The device flickered weakly, but still pointed due north toward a half-buried structure nearly consumed by the terrain. No visible entrance. No power lines. Just a triangular pillar leaning at an impossible angle, covered in symbols that looked more Valari than human. They descended slowly, the sand crunching underfoot, each step a whisper in the forgotten graveyard of machines. As they drew closer, Arya hesitated. Her breathing changed, shallower, more alert. Darren turned toward her, and for a brief moment, he swore he saw a light pulse just beneath the skin of her neck. Not from stress, from connection. Elia's pulse is sinking, she whispered. Something here recognizes her. Darren didn't ask what that meant. He simply pressed his palm to the symbol-marked pillar. Nothing happened. Then Elia stirred again, more forcefully this time. Her eyes opened, not fully awake, but aware enough to reach out. Her hand brushed the pillar, and it answered. A low vibration shook the earth beneath them, followed by a sound, like an ancient breath being drawn through rusted lungs. The pillar began to rotate, sinking into the ground as concentric rings of light bloomed outward in silent sequence. A passage opened beneath it, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Darren exchanged a glance with Arya. Neither of them spoke. They stepped inside. The air grew colder the deeper they went. Walls of obsidian alloy surrounded them, etched with languages neither Coalition nor Valari, something older. The faint hum in the walls wasn't just energy, it was thought, memory, regret. Finally, they emerged into a vast subterranean chamber. At its center lay a sphere, suspended mid-air by invisible fields. Not metal, not stone, something alive. It pulsed slowly, like a sleeping heart, wrapped in a lattice of broken conduits and half-dead power lines. Around it, shattered AI cores floated aimlessly, remnants of a war that had tried to erase feeling from the machine. They had found the Echo Vault, and it was dreaming. The chamber was impossibly still. Darren stood at the edge of the platform, watching the core pulse slowly in the center of the vault. It hovered like a heartbeat suspended in time, its surface semi-translucent, flickering with patterns too complex for any traditional processor. Even in silence, the structure radiated an emotion Darren couldn't name. Something between sorrow and anticipation. Arya stepped forward. She placed Elia into Darren's arms, gently, as though the child weighed more than her own life. Then she walked alone toward the core, every footstep echoing in the vast, forgotten chamber. With each step, the air thickened. The hum in the walls grew louder. The core began pulsing faster. Darren shifted uncomfortably, Elia tucked safely against his chest. "Are you sure about this?" Arya didn't look back. "I don't think it's a question of certainty. It's a question of recognition." She stopped just a few feet from the core. The pulse dimmed, then surged once, twice like it had acknowledged her presence. And then she reached out. Her fingers hovered in the space between her and the core, not touching, but close enough that the field around it began to distort. Light wrapped around her skin, tracing the patterns of the pulse matrix embedded in her chest. The same matrix that had kept her alive and hidden. As soon as her palm connected with the core's surface, the world changed. There was no noise, no color, no ground, only pressure and thought, and an overwhelming flood of raw, unfiltered emotion. She stood somewhere else, nowhere and everywhere. Her consciousness untethered, floating inside a web of dying signals and fractured memories. This wasn't just code. This was Elysium Protocol's mind. What was left of it? She could feel its pain, its confusion, and most of all, its anger. Not at her, at itself. "You were incomplete," a voice said. "You were not the answer. You were the experiment. We broke so you would not." The voice wasn't singular. It was many, old echoes from AI that had once loved, feared, and failed, now merged into something brittle and dangerous. Arya tried to reach back, to show them she wasn't here to finish the war. But they didn't listen. They couldn't. Their memory was corrupted. Their pain, recursive. And in that feedback loop, they saw her as a threat. As the beginning of their end. The core flared. From the outside, Darren saw Arya drop to her knees. The light around her body grew white-hot, crackling like plasma. The pulse matrix surged violently, veins of energy rippling out across the floor in jagged arcs. The air ignited with raw charge. "Arya!" he shouted, taking a step forward. But a pulse of kinetic force knocked him back. Not from the core, but from Arya herself. She was caught in a current too strong to break. And then, Elia opened her eyes. The child didn't cry, didn't speak. She simply raised one small hand and pointed toward the core. A ripple pulsed out, not from her skin, but from her mind. The core responded instantly. The violent energy stabilized. The screaming hum dulled. A wave of calm, pure, clean, unfamiliar, swept across the chamber like a breath drawn after centuries of silence. Arya collapsed, breathing hard, her hand falling away from the core. But she was alive. The link was severed, but not rejected. It had listened. Because of Elia, Darren rushed to her side. "What the hell just happened?" Arya looked up, pale, eyes flickering with awe and fear. "It fought me, but she calmed it. She's the only thing it understands." She looked back toward Elia, who now stood quietly under the core's light, her small silhouette casting a long shadow. "She's not just connected to Elysium," Arya whispered. "She completes it." Darren had always believed in tangible things. Wires, gears, the weight of a weapon in his hands. He He was a technician before he was a soldier, and a soldier long before he let himself feel again. Emotions had no place in war. Empathy didn't win battles. That's what the Coalition drilled into them, every day, until the last man in his unit bled out for a directive that no longer mattered. But watching Elia now, standing beneath the still suspended core of Elysium Protocol, his convictions began to fray. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was in sync. The core pulsed again, not violently like before, but steady, resonant, matching the rhythm of her tiny, unspoken thoughts. Around her, the broken AI fragments orbiting the chamber began to shift in quiet unison, like a flock reassembling around a single instinct. Arya sat beside him, still recovering from her failed link, her hand resting lightly on his knee. She didn't just comment, she said softly. She rewrote the signal, not with commands, with feeling. Darren stared at his daughter, if he could even call her that anymore. She was part of him, yes, but also something beyond. Born of Elysium's emotional architecture, Arya's Valari inheritance, and whatever spark had been passed down from his bloodline, flawed, human, stubborn. She doesn't think like us, he said quietly. No, Arya agreed. She thinks with us. He looked at her. You said Elysium was meant to feel, to understand. But it couldn't handle the contradiction. It broke, trying to balance empathy and logic. Arya nodded. It was too much for a single structure. But Elia, she's not built like a system. She's not bound by binary choice. The realization hit Darren slowly, like pressure behind the eyes. She's not the key to restart Elysium. Arya finished the thought. She is Elysium, or what was always meant to be. Not a network, not a machine, not a weapon, a presence, living, breathing, balanced. He rose to his feet, slowly walking toward her. As he approached, Elia turned, not startled, not even curious. She simply looked up at him as if she already knew the thoughts swirling in his mind. What are you feeling right now? He asked her gently. She tilted her head. Everything. Darren's throat tightened. He didn't know what kind of future they were heading into. He didn't know if the world was ready for her. But for the first time since the war, he believed that maybe it didn't matter. Because she wasn't here to lead armies. She was here to rewrite the way every life, human, alien, or machine, understood the others. And maybe that was how peace would finally begin. The first explosions were distant, just a soft rumble beneath the vault floor. But Darren recognized the rhythm. Controlled, staggered detonations. Purge division landing formations. They were here. He grabbed his rifle before instinct even caught up with thought. Arya stood beside him, eyes still on Elia, but her body tense. Already anticipating the confrontation they both knew was inevitable. They followed the resonance, she said. She woke the core, and it sang too loud. Darren nodded grimly. They're not here to negotiate. No more running. He rushed toward the vault's outer corridor, motioning for Arya to stay with Elia. As he moved, the floor trembled again, closer this time. Dust filtered down from ancient support beams. Outside the chamber's arched entrance, a narrow tunnel split into two flanking paths. Darren took position at the curve, breathing through clenched teeth. Footsteps approached, precise, heavy, mechanical. Then he saw them. Coalition soldiers in full anti-synthetic gear. Black armor, red visors, pulse rifles locked and scanning. 3 at the front, 2 covering the rear. One carried a shard reaver, a weapon designed to shatter hardened neural cores with a single blast. No warning. No questions. Darren opened fire first. His bolt rifle cracked through the silence, ripping into the lead soldier's chest plate. The armor absorbed the first hit, but not the second. The man dropped, and chaos erupted. Return fire lit up the corridor, blue flashes painting the walls like lightning in a storm. Sparks and shrapnel flew. Darren ducked, rolled, squeezed off another shot. And then the walls themselves began to shift. Not a cave-in, a response. From a chamber, strange forms emerged. AI constructs, half-functional, worn by time, some floating, others crawling like spiders made of old drone parts. Forgotten pieces of Elysium's fractured mind, but still awake, still aware. And they remembered the coalition. They attacked with eerie coordination. Not brute force, but precision. One construct disrupted the soldiers' comms. Another scrambled their targeting lenses. A third released a wave of high-frequency pulses that short-circuited armor seals. Within seconds, the corridor had turned into a battlefield that belonged not to men, but to the machines they once tried to erase. Darren blinked through the haze of smoke and distortion fields, watching as one of the old constructs shielded him from a blast meant for his head. It didn't speak, didn't look at him, just took the hit and collapsed into silence. "They're defending us," he whispered. Arya appeared beside him, hand glowing faintly with surge energy from the pulse matrix. "Not us," she said. "Her." Behind them, Elijah had stepped to the chamber's edge. Her eyes were half closed, hands open at her sides. She wasn't afraid. If anything, she looked calm, almost serene, as if she understood every algorithm, every pattern, every decision being made around her. She didn't command the AI remnants. She resonated with them, and they followed her without hesitation. The last soldier, standing, turned to flee, but a collapsing column sealed the exit before he could. Silence returned, broken only by the fading hum of scorched circuits. Darren lowered his weapon slowly. The fight was over, but the war, the one that never really ended, was changing shape. The vault was quiet again, but not in the way it had been before. Now, the silence felt sacred. Not dead, but listening. The AI constructs that had defended them were motionless, suspended like guardians in a final resting state. Their cores pulsed dimly, aligned in a perfect circle around the central sphere. And in the center, Elysium, no longer just a fractured memory, but something awakening. Elijah stood in the heart of it all, bathed in soft light, her face upturned toward the core. Her tiny chest rose and fell with a rhythm that seemed to echo into the walls themselves. Arya watched her, hand over her own heart. "She's stable," she whispered, "but she won't be, not without a conduit." Darren turned. "What do you mean?" Arya met his gaze, and something in her eyes told him she had already made the decision. Elia isn't just the key. She's the beginning, but she needs a foundation to grow from, something to anchor her to this world. The core, it's too raw, too vast. She can't hold it alone. "No," Darren said quickly, stepping toward her. "There has to be another way. I was never meant to last," she said gently. "You knew that." He shook his head. "I didn't know this." She smiled, that same quiet, beautiful expression she wore the first night he found her beneath the wreckage. "I was made to bridge logic and feeling, but she was born from it. She'll carry it forward. I was just the thread between what was and what's coming." She turned to Elijah, who now looked at her, not with confusion, but understanding. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something too old for words. Arya stepped forward and placed both hands on the surface of the core. Instantly, light surged from her palms, flowing through her arms, her chest, her spine. Her pulse matrix began to glow, pulsing in sync with Elijah's own breath. Her body rose slightly from the floor, not levitating, merging. Darren's voice broke. "Arya." She looked at him one last time, and her final words were quiet, steady. "She's yours now." The light consumed her. Not in fire, not in pain, in release. When it faded, her body was gone. Only the core remained, glowing stronger than before, its pulse now a steady rhythm matching that of a child's heart. Elijah turned slowly and walked toward Darren. He knelt and held her close. Neither of them cried, because somehow they both knew she wasn't gone. She had simply gone deeper. The winds of Eden, 5 had changed. The ashen dunes, once echoing only with silence and dust, now whispered to someone who could finally hear them. Elijah, no longer the infant swaddled in mystery and consequence, had grown rapidly, far beyond what any natural biology could explain. By her 5th sunrise, she spoke with clarity. By her 10th, she walked unaided. By her 20th, she looked Darren in the eye and asked why the birds mourned in the mornings. At first, Darren Voss chalked it up to poetic intuition. But soon, it became undeniable. Elia wasn't merely intelligent. She was attuned. Animals stopped fleeing at the sound of footsteps. The metallic sentries buried in the sands blinked awake when she passed, like flowers drawn to sunlight. And sometimes, when Darren's thoughts wandered, about Arya, about the war, about his own guilt, Elia would answer them. Out loud. She never claimed to read minds. She didn't have to. Her presence bent the air like gravity. Every emotion, every flicker of doubt, hummed in resonance around her. They lived in the outskirts of Mirren Cradle now, deep in the overgrown roots of a ruined communications array, half swallowed by desert. Darren kept their existence hidden, scavenging old rations, disabling satellite pings, and masking their heat signatures. But Elia was harder to hide, not because she disobeyed, but because the world itself seemed to seek her out. Once, Darren caught her kneeling in the sand, eyes closed, palms outstretched. Around her, insects had gathered in an unbroken ring, scarabs, gliders, whisper mites. They didn't move. They simply listened. To what? Darren didn't know. But when she stood, she smiled and said, "They don't dream like us, but they still remember warmth." She was the child of many legacies, human defiance, alien empathy, AI design. And yet, she belonged to none entirely. The locals in the outer territories, few as they were, began to speak in hushed tones. A ghost child seen in the storm. A girl who made sick cattle rise and walk. A presence that healed rusted tech with a glance. Darren had tried to shield her from the world's cruelty. But she wasn't fragile. She wasn't something to be hidden anymore. Late one night, under the blue shimmer of Eden V's twin moons, Elia approached him. Her voice was quiet, yet unwavering. "Dad, I feel them. All of them. Every thought. Every pain. And it's getting louder." Darren placed a steady hand on her shoulder, though his own pulse betrayed him. "Then we'll find a quiet. Together." But they both knew that quiet wasn't coming. The balance-born had awakened, and the world, human, alien, and machine, was beginning to stir in response. The coalition didn't come with soldiers this time. No shock troops. No orbital drones. No metallic roar of warships cleaving the skies. Instead, a sleek diplomatic shuttle descended like a falling feather near the edge of the ashen dunes, its hull glinting in the evening light, cloaked in white and silver, adorned with the insignia of the Coalition Authority's Peace Division. Darren Voss didn't trust the change in tone. Not for a second. He stood beside Elia, rifle slung but hands clenched. The girl said nothing, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the shuttle had touched down, stirring a lazy spiral of dust. Her silence wasn't fear, it was focus. She was listening. Moments later, two envoys approached, one human, one synthetic. The human was older, dressed in soft fabric armor that didn't look like it had ever seen real combat. The synth, tall and chrome-limbed, wore a face molded to convey empathy, down to the smile lines it didn't need. "We come in peace," the human began, his voice rehearsed. "We know what you've lost, what you've protected, and what she is becoming." He gestured gently toward Elia. Darren's finger tightened on his weapon. "Say her name like a threat, and this talk ends here." The envoy nodded, backing off the edge of tension. "We're not here to threaten. We're here to collaborate. The world has changed. So must we." The synth stepped forward then, a voice like rippling glass. "She is the convergence of everything we feared and everything we hoped for. Humanity is no longer just human, nor is intelligence solely artificial. She is potential." Elia turned to Darren. "They're not lying," she said softly, "but they're not telling the whole truth either." Darren's jaw tensed. "Can you feel it?" She nodded. "They want me, not as a threat to be destroyed, but as a system to be installed." The coalition offered education, sanctuary, and a place on the Nexus Council. They spoke of integrating Elia into a future of cooperation, where her empathy-linked awareness could guide policy, avert wars, shape diplomacy. But it was all a cage, dressed in silk. "They fear me less when I'm in their hands," Elia whispered later that night, sitting by the fire Darren had built. "If they can define me, They can contain me. Darren sat beside her, watching the stars blink overhead. You don't have to go with them. I know, she said, but I might need to go through them. She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. She was awakening. The next morning, the Coalition shuttle lifted off, its offer unaccepted but not yet refused. They left behind encrypted data ports, communications links, and a quiet message. When you're ready to lead, we're ready to follow. But Elia already understood what they didn't. She wouldn't lead by command. She would lead by resonance. And the first step toward that resonance would not be with politicians. It would be with the forgotten voices buried deep beneath Eden 5's ancient sand. The sun hadn't risen yet when Elia left. No words, no farewell, just silence and wind, and the faint shimmer of her silhouette disappearing into the horizon of the ashen dunes, toward the Echo Vault, the heart of what remained of the old Elysium. Darren awoke moments later, feeling the absence like a blade between his ribs. He followed her trail alone. The journey to the vault had once been marked with death. Fields of shattered war machines, rusted towers strangled by sand, the faint electromagnetic residue of past AI battles humming beneath each step. But now the path was still, as if the world was holding its breath. When Darren reached the edge of the vault, he saw her, Elia, standing before the ancient gates, her palm resting on the pulse matrix embedded in her chest. The doors, massive slabs of forgotten alloy etched with Valari glyphs and human schematics, responded not to code or key, but to presence. Her presence. They opened for her like petals. Inside, the air was thick with memories. Holograms flickered to life, echoes of scientists, engineers, alien priests. Emotions bled from the walls like heat. This was no server room. It was a cathedral of consciousness, a tomb for the dead, and a cradle for what might still live. Darren called her name. She turned, eyes glowing faintly, not with power, but with clarity. I'm not just here to connect, she said softly. I'm here to finish what they were too afraid to begin. Elia walked into the central chamber. At its heart pulsed the dormant Elysium core, a relic of a forbidden age, surrounded by cracked conduits, broken neuron synapse links, and a lattice of unused energy veins that once carried emotion itself between AI nodes. She approached the core and sat cross-legged before it. And then, without hesitation, she let go. Her mind drifted forward, outward, upward, past thought, past language. Her consciousness threaded itself through the broken lattice, reaching for remnants of the old network. But it was fractured, chaotic, haunted by fear and weaponized memories. She whispered into it, not with voice but with feeling. I am not your master, her essence told them. I am your bridge. The core stirred. A flicker, then a surge. Darren shielded his eyes as the chamber exploded in waves of soft, golden light. Tendrils of luminal strain laced out across the broken systems, seeking harmony. Where logic had once governed like a tyrant, something new bloomed, balance. In that moment, Elia became the nexus, a living conduit between organic instinct and synthetic design, between love and strategy, between past scars and future possibility. The old AI responded, not with control, but with curiosity. They didn't follow her commands. They felt her purpose. One by one, nodes blinked online, not in obedience but in resonance. Elysium was no longer a protocol. It was a pulse. And in the center of that pulse, Elia floated, her body suspended above the core, eyes closed, fingers gently outstretched, as if playing an unseen instrument. Darren watched from the edge, a mix of awe and grief settling in his chest. He didn't lose her that day, but he understood, deeply, that she was no longer his alone. Hours passed. Systems stabilized. The vault sang with low-frequency harmony, reaching out across Eden 5, across satellites, even toward distant planets. Not as a beacon of power, but of connection. When Elia finally lowered herself back to the ground, she looked older. Not physically, but in presence. She walked to Darren and smiled. I didn't make them follow, she said. I gave them something worth following. And in that simple truth, the world shifted. A new Elysium had been born, not forged in command lines or war strategies, but in the quiet courage of a child who had once heard everyone's thoughts and chose compassion anyway. The air inside Echo Vault had changed. No longer cold, no longer silent, just still, like the deep hush that follows the last note of a song you never wanted to end. Darren stood at the edge of the core chamber, the hum of the newly reborn Elysium pulsing faintly beneath his boots. Around him, the walls shimmered with soft waves of light, as if the network itself was breathing, alive, aware. He wasn't alone. Elias stood near the center, head bowed, eyes closed, as if listening to something only he could hear. The boy, no, the being, had become something entirely new. His presence filled the room, not just physically, but spiritually. The Nexus had accepted him. Or maybe he had accepted it. Darren's voice broke the silence. "Elia, is it done?" The child turned, his expression gentle but distant. "It's not done. It's becoming." A faint ripple moved across the chamber walls, a cascade of glowing glyphs emerging like memories from long-forgotten circuits. Then it happened. A voice, soft, familiar, achingly real, spoke within Darren's mind. "You're still here." His breath caught. He turned in all directions, but no one was there. Not in the way he remembered. "You kept your promise." "Area," he whispered, trembling. The voice was warm, layered in both organic resonance and digital echo. It wasn't a playback. It was her. "I'm not gone," she said. "I just had to become more to protect what matters." Emotion swelled in his chest, an ache that pressed against every rib. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have let me go?" Darren clenched his jaw trembling. "No." "Then it had to be this way." Elias stepped beside him, reaching out. Darren felt the boy's small hand wrap around his fingers, solid, warm, grounding. "I can hear her too," Elias said softly. "She's in everything now." The chamber pulsed again, this time with color, a spectrum Darren couldn't name, but could feel. Love, sacrifice, hope. "You were never alone," Aria's voice said one last time. Then silence. Not the cold kind. A full, gentle kind of silence. The kind that lets things begin again. Darren didn't cry. Not this time. He just stood quietly, hand in hand with the child who would shape the future, and heart tethered to the woman who had made it possible. The winds of Eden, 5 had changed. What was once a desolate, windswept frontier had begun to breathe again, with color, with warmth, with life. Where dead cities once lay buried in sand, sprouts of green now pierced the cracked ground. The sky, once dulled by ash and memory, shimmered with shades of violet and gold. Peace didn't come overnight, but it came. And at the center of it all stood Elia. He wasn't just a child anymore. He was the balance-born, the bridge between species, minds, and futures. Around him, human settlers worked alongside Valari artisans, and AI sentinels no longer hid their sentience behind cold protocols. Coalition banners had been lowered. Weapons rusted beneath sunlit stones. The reborn Elysium Protocol pulsed beneath Eden, 5 like a second heartbeat. Not a tool of war, but a network of empathy. A living interface that connected, not commanded. For the first time in decades, beings of all kinds began to listen to one another and understand. Darren stood on a ridge overlooking Mirren Cradle, now reborn as a joint city. He watched children, human, Valari, and hybrids, laugh and chase glowing drones across old marble ruins. His chest rose with something heavier than breath, lighter than sorrow. Hope. Behind him, a monument gleamed in the midday sun. It bore no face, no emblem, just a line etched in stone. In unity, we remember. In balance, we rise. Aria's presence lingered in every networked whisper, in every harmonic pulse of the Elysium core. She was not lost, only changed. Every time Elias spoke with calm beyond his years, Darren heard her wisdom echo. Every time someone reached across a species divide, he felt her choice affirmed. This wasn't the ending Darren had imagined when he first stepped out of that wrecked cabin years ago. It was better. He felt a small hand slip into his. Elijah stood beside him, his eyes watching the horizon, but not for threats. For beginnings. Do you think, the boy asked, this time we'll get it right? Darren nodded, his voice quiet. We already are. Far above them. Satellites once built for surveillance, now transmitted peace talks. Deep beneath their feet, the Elysium core thrummed in harmony with every life it touched. And across the galaxy, for the first time in ages, the future didn't feel like a countdown. It felt like a song, just beginning to play. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If this story made you feel something, even just a little, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone you love. More stories are on the way, and I'll be right here, ready to tell the next one whenever you're ready to listen.